very quickly hand over to Oren before we go into our subject matters.
So, our panelists, kicking off with, I'll go through the list of names and then we'll kick off with our first speaker. That's Pastor Ian Sweeney, of the Seventh-day Adventist Church, representing the Adventist Church in the UK and Ireland. We've got O.C. Canova, who's the director at Barclays Wealth and Investments. Constantia Penny, who's a solicitor in wills and lasting power of attorney. We have Janine Robertson, who's a grief therapist.
Also talking about mental health.
We've got Candice Hines from NHS Blood and Transplant, and her specific role is what you call a SNOD, which is a special nurse organ donation. And Mr. Damien Melville, who's a funeral director.
From Melville and Daughters.
Yeah, so there are our panelists. So Beverly sort of highlighted this, this need we need to have within our community to talk about
the inevitable.
Death, dying. But we, in general, but especially the Black community, we shy away with it for many reasons, cultural, religious reasons. And so speaking from a secular point of view, we just really wanted to come at this and bring our community together. And let's really go for it. It's a topical subject. This time last week, the whole world was talking about the death of one person, the Queen, and how they felt about it. We need to do the same within our community ourselves. Yeah. And so we're going to take it from the secular and we're going to pass that on to Pastor Sweeney to give an overview from a religious point of view. So, Pastor Sweeney.
Thank you very much. Within the diversity of the world's major religions, there's one point of unity and teaching, which is this: death is not the end, there's a future life to come. And expressions of this future life differ, but the common denominator is that there is life to come for the deceased. Now, anthropologists have suggested that burial rituals might indicate belief in an afterlife, so the dead are buried with personal items such as jewelry, weapons, food, and drink. And while there might not be written records of certain religious beliefs of early humans, the burial practices and artifacts found in graves strongly suggest that these were to accompany the dead to their next destination. Now, I myself have officiated at numerous funerals. I've witnessed mourners throwing ganja, marijuana into the grave, pouring or dropping bottles of spirits into the grave. And whilst that might not be seen as a religious practice in itself, it suggests a spiritual belief that those things might be enjoyed by the deceased in their next life. And as I've heard mourners say, take that with your brethren to go on. Now, that part of the human being that survives death is known or called in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, or is known as the soul. In Hindu belief, all life goes through birth, life, death, and rebirth. And according to Hinduism, all living things have an Atman, which, for want of a better term, could be compared to one's spirit or soul, which after death moves on into another living thing. So there you have reincarnation, a key belief within Hinduism. And of course, they will say if a person leads or led a good life, they will be reborn or reincarnated into something better than they were previously living. However, all the major faiths believe that after the spirit or the soul has left the body, it moves on to another existence. Now, some faiths teach that the soul ascends either upwards to a paradise or heaven, or descends downwards into punishment or hell. Now, how a person lives determines their destination or how the soul will be treated after death. And the soul is judged or evaluated on the basis of the life they lived. Now, I'm a Christian with a Seventh-day Adventist belief, and we actually differ from the majority of Christian denominations in as much as we do not believe that we have a body and a separate soul. That's what we believe is that when you die, you die. That's it, you're done. Having said that, we believe in an afterlife, which is the teaching of the resurrection at the very end of time. Now, pastoral reflections. There's an incident recorded in the New Testament scripture that shows that spiritual beliefs and faith do not eradicate worldly or financial concerns and surrounding death. So, for example, the story is recorded of when Jesus was giving some spiritual instruction, one of the audience members shouted out, "Please tell my brother to divide our father's estate with me." Now, Jesus, this is found in the Gospel of Luke. Now, Jesus refused to arbitrate in what was clearly a contentious family matter. And in the time of Jesus, religious teachers or rabbis were often the solicitors of their day. But it helps illustrate this point. Death affects the living beyond mourning the loss of a loved one. For the living, death soon translates into the reality of practical considerations. We may believe a spirit has gone to heaven or wherever, but the reality is, for the living, reality bites. And it's the living that need to make preparations, of course, for the financial outlay that follows death. And I see this all the time. So, for example, a mother who died with, I don't think she had £10 savings towards the funeral costs or towards anything. The siblings were relatively close, a number of them. But once they saw how much it would cost to bury mama, it seemed as though none of the siblings had any money. Now, believing that mama is in a spiritually better place is fine, and that's comforting, and that's good. But for the living, how are they going to pay for mama to go into the ground or send her home, which in death costs more than a first-class airline ticket? What I've also found is that death changes family relationships. When there is no money and children or family either do not want to or cannot find the money to put together for the funeral and just the funeral alone, and it changes relationships. And also relationships are changed when there is money and or property. And I believe that frank and honest family conversations need to be had regarding wills, money, and distribution of assets. And I've witnessed siblings taking each other to court over the house that belonged to their deceased parents. Now, respecting and honoring our loved ones in death is important. It is not a trivial matter. However, I would again, a pastoral observation. I remember sitting in the home of a man who had recently died. His home was very humble. He was not at all wealthy. In other words, he was poor. Now, his daughters had traveled up from the south. I was working in the north, and they came to arrange the funeral, etc. And they showed me pictures of as we were preparing, going through the order of service, and they were looking for the funeral, and they were showing me pictures of an absolutely beautiful casket that they had. And they showed me and were telling me quite enthusiastically that it had a picture of the Last Supper inside, and they told me it was sumptuously padded for their father. Now, I'm not wanting to do our funeral director out of business, but as they were explaining this, a spring from Dad's old sofa that I was sitting in was jocking me in the back. And I thought to myself, surely it would have been better to have bought Dad a nice sofa, unlike the sofa I was sitting in that was stabbing me in the back. So let me end by saying this. The practical issues of death must be addressed, and they should not only be considered after somebody dies, but also before death. And this does not negate our spiritual beliefs, whatever they are. Now, in the Old Testament scriptures, it tells the story of one of Israel's king, and God sent a prophet to speak with the king who was dying. And as was mentioned, we have celebrated the life that was in the death of our queen. And the message the prophet delivered to this dying king was simply this, and it's found and it was written by the prophet Isaiah. He told the dying king, "Put your house in order, because you are going to die. You will not recover." And so in putting his house in order, the king had to choose an heir. He had to prepare his family, his friends, and indeed his nation for his impending death. He had to prepare them practically, in spiritual ways, and indeed in emotional ways. Sadly, as too often I and other faith leaders realize, When people do not put their house in order, it often leaves undue stress on their family and friends. And so whatever our beliefs, I'll end by saying this, whatever our beliefs, whether we believe our beloved ones have gone to heaven or whatever, or into another state of life, the reality is we also have to live in the here and now. And so we need to make good preparations, not only for our soul going to heaven, but that we can also ensure that preparations are made for those whom we leave behind. So hopefully I've crammed in everything within my allotted time. Thank you.
Oh my God, I just want to say amen.
Amen, yes.
Amen, Pastor Sweeney. You have just summed up the very reason why we are having this conversation. That was awesome.
Yeah, that's
that was absolutely awesome. Do any of our panelists want to say anything based around what Pastor Sweeney has just said?
Fantastic.
I think it's a perfect segue to my section, Bevan.
it is
It is.
and it is perfect. Over to you, Ossie.
Thank you. Thanks for being with us this evening, everyone. And special thanks to the team at ACLT. I think it's a phenomenal enterprise you have. And I think, going back on what the words of Pastor Sweeney there is house in order.
Yes.
And speaking on behalf of the panel today, which is so diverse and rich, by the way, our hope is that we can trigger you to start thinking about getting your house in order. And for those of you who have started in your journey, that this could probably act as an enabler for the next few weeks, months, years, decades, and for some of you, centuries to come. So, Oren, would you be able to just to put up my slides, if you can?
Yep. Bear just 1 second. I'm just going to share the screen and go to there. Let me just make sure that. Can you see your slides?
Perfect.
Okay.
So my preference isn't to go through every slide because I want you to get value for your time this evening. So Oren will help me and probably refer to three slides, I think, today.
Okay.
So, my day job is working really with individuals and families. And the crux of what we do is help people make better financial decisions, not just for the immediate family, but for generations to come. And the way to think about the information you receive from me today is in 3 categories. You'll have information that relates to the stress that takes its toll on the family in today's day and age and how we handle that stress from a financial perspective. Will dovetail nicely into how you plan for the next generation, talking about, setting your house in order. And then finally, because everyone talks to me about this every day in the office, talk a little bit about inflation and investing. But beyond this call today, the team at ACLT will send out this deck, and it could perhaps work as a reference point for you for prosperity basis. So, we're going to talk about tax, we're going to talk about investing. From my point of view, none of the information here today is specific advice. So it's general information that's in the public domain. Always important for you to get specific advice if you need advice, but the information today is all generic. If I can have the next slide, please. Thank you. So I sat down a week today, so last Wednesday, and I picked together a few of the headlines in the press, and none of this is news. It talks about a recession, interest rate hikes, it talks about food prices, it talks about fuel prices. As we sit today, not that this is old news, the newest news in town, because news is new information, is really about how poorly the pound is doing. But in all of this, my view as an advisor is when I talk to clients, when I talk to families, all of this information increases stress in households, often in our environment. But what we always ignore is the internal stress we have inside of ourselves. So there is a significant link between continued elevated stress and certain metabolic issues we have, especially in the Black community and ethnic minorities. I'm talking about high blood pressure and type 2 diabetes. We also know, given the structural imbalances within the UK, that people of color, ethnic minorities are more, and 9 times out of 10, to be on the worst end of the impact of economic slowdowns or issues in the economy. So as a community, not only are we adversely impacted because of broader themes, but also as a community, if we are stressed, we are also bringing forward diseases which are silent. If you have high blood pressure, you have diabetes, there isn't a label. It's only when it's too serious you get told about it. So what we do when we talk to clients, if I can have the next slide, please, is to say, look, the best thing you can do is just have a plan. And that goes back again to Pastor Sweeney, getting your house in order. And I've nicked a proverb from the Chinese. Lots of people have claimed this. The Africans have claimed this. The Chinese have claimed it. But historically, the earliest reference to this is from the Chinese community. And it says that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, because it takes 20 years for a tree to grow to a good size. And the second best time is now. So what this tells you is, it doesn't matter whether you've made a bad decision, you've fallen out with your siblings, your parents, your kids, put that all aside, because you have a duty of care to yourself and your loved ones, and get a plan, not yesterday, because yesterday is gone, but get it today. And it doesn't matter where you are and how much money you have, this plan works. Whether you're building your assets, whether you want to protect your family, whether you want to grow your nest egg because you've stopped working, or whether you're thinking about passing assets on, you need a plan. And I'm also a serial thief, so I've stolen another saying from a chap called Brian Tracy. He's a phenomenal speaker, and he talks about having a smart plan, and it works like a treat. Making your plan specific, make sure you can measure it, make sure it's achievable, and also make it relevant for your situation and make it timely. And the idea is like a work of art. If you can review this with your partner, with your children, with your loved ones on a regular basis, even though there's a stigma, as Oren said at the start of the session today, you're more likely to get to where you need to be. Now, if I can dove slightly moving on to preparing for the next generation here, and if I can have slide 5 or 6, actually, Oren, so one more. Yes, so this for me is something that's not spoken about extensively. So from a planning perspective, the low-hanging fruit is to always have a will. And it's not just nice to have, it's so important because it allows you to pass your hard-earned assets to people you love. Now, as a community, we don't speak about it much often for a number of reasons, but ultimately, if you don't have a will and you pass on, the government have a plan. Because when you don't have a will, there are certain rules, it's called intestate, and how your assets are dispersed. If you have children, it may go to them. It can go as far as your brothers, your uncles, in some cases, your grandparents and your nephews, which is the worst position to be at, a point where you have a high level of stress. So having a will can be as simple as what you would like to happen to your cherished assets, or it could be thinking about your dependent relatives. If you have young children, who is going to stand in the gap on a physical basis for their care? If you have a partner who needs care around the clock and you're no longer there, who steps in? And in our community, there are famous people who passed on without a will. Most recently, those of you who are a big fan of Black Panther, Chadwick Boseman, a famous actor, sadly passed away without a will. If we skipped a generation before that, you have people like Bob Marley, and for those of you that remember Martin Luther King. Now, these are all notable, famous people who changed the world, but didn't have a plan for today or tomorrow. So the ask I ask of you is to think about that. And crucially, one of the other points to think about is, without a will, your estate effectively falls into a very costly and time expensive system, because without a will, you're unable to get something called probate in the courts. And without probate, assets aren't dispersed. So with a will, you have a lower probability of strife with your loved ones. You know your assets get dispersed effectively. And crucially, you may not know this, but in the UK, there's something called estate tax or inheritance tax. In the UK, it's a significant slice. It's 40% of one's asset base above a certain threshold. Now, a lot of us are second-generation immigrants or third-generation immigrants, so our forefathers or foremothers may have bought property, and that property is a sizable value. So whilst they may not have significant cash assets, that is a value that ultimately may be exposed to taxation. Last year alone, HMRC took a cool £5.2 billion in 1 year in inheritance tax. A lot of that can be planned on. It's so simple as simply having insurance. It costs next to nothing, and it does a world of good for you and your loved ones. It's not always right in every circumstance, but where you have a significant asset base in terms of property or cash or investments, it is sensible to think about having insurance. I don't want to go through the remainder slides, and I'll just talk off the cuff, and I would just want to move slowly now into inflation. So inflation is quite topical. If you pick up any press, anyone tells you that it's 10% today, it's 9% tomorrow. In reality, inflation just simply means that the cost of buying anything has gone up from your perspective. It's negative from your pricing power, so it means that you can afford less because things go up in value. It also means, given that the pound has fallen in value, we are a net importer in the UK. So we are importing inflation. So if you're not aware, 10% inflation that we had in August, unfortunately, it's going to look quite tame to what will come. So what you need to think about is, if you have excess disposable savings and you're concerned about inflation, there are opportunities for you to put some of your investments to work. But what I would say are three abiding policies. First of all, make sure you have a rainy day fund. When you invest, you're thinking about a long-term scenario, 5 to 7 years, number one. Number two, what is your goal? Think about what you're trying to aim for, because that would help you in your decisions. And then finally, have some consideration around what you already have. UK PLC has phenomenal plans that allow your investments to grow tax exempt. So whether that's adding to your pension, because the government adds with you. So for every 80p you put into a pension, the government adds 20p. Your pension grows tax-free. If you have a little bit of change, you can have ISAs, which sort of grow tax exempt. And you have young children, you can set up something called a junior ISA. So there are all sorts of things to do when it comes to battling for inflation. And then lastly, what I want to leave you with is a fantastic resource. So Oren, if you could take me to the very last slide, please.
Yeah, just 1 second.
Thank you.
I think I just accidentally, well, I think I've taken it off, but let me just bring it back on.
That's okay. So what the government has done is concerned that a lot of people are underserved. Thank you. That's it. The one before that, please. Sorry, one up. Second to last, Oren, I think. Yep, carry on, one more. One more. I think you're going up.
Yeah, so the last one is this.
This is it, thank you. Money helper. That's it. Thank you, guys. So I want to leave you with this, and this deck will go out from the ACLT team. This is a free government resource that covers everything from planning for your family, from wills, how to save, how to get your pension sorted, how to plan for your children. It's all free of charge. At the moment, there's a revolution in finance. Lots of banks are shutting the high street branches. We are not going to have access to quality advice on the high street. So the government have put this free advice service that's available around the clock with a phone number for you to get free advice. So my encouragement is for you to have this as a bookmark and refer to this as you see fit. And I'm slightly over my 10 minutes, I think.
That's
Yeah,
no, that's good.
That's brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, OC.
Yeah.
And it's all, everything that you said now nicely falls in with our next speaker, who is Constantia Penny, who's going to be speaking about wills and lasting power of attorney. Thanks very much, OC. Penny, can we now hand over to you?
Can you hear me? I'm just unmuting. Am I? Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
we can hear you.
We've got you.
Right. Okay. Well, excellent. I kind of wanted to sit here and listen to the previous two speakers a bit longer because they were picking up on so many really vital points and crossing over into the area I want to share a bit about tonight. And in 10 minutes, I don't want anyone to think, oh, I'll understand all about wills and LPA. You won't. But what you'll get is a sense of, I hope, what both speakers have said is that this webinar might be, let's talk about death, but I want to invite people to see wills as talking about things that happen in life. So I want people to see it as something that's all about when you're alive with all your loved ones, let's have these conversations. And one of the things that has come out very much is that if you don't have a will, people don't realize until the person dies and they don't have a will, how horrendous the experience is after that. OC's just gone through it, and there are ways around dealing with the government when you don't have a will, but it is time consuming, and often you end up having to pay solicitors, etc., to help you navigate your way through that. So that's probably money you're paying out that you don't even know if you're going to be able to get back. But let me start with, I think most people know that you have a will, that you prepare it to assist those you leave behind. I think Pastor Sweeney said it's to support those you leave behind, to do what you would have wished, to carry out your wishes. And OC picked up on the fact that you're doing it now because we know the tensions and stresses that come with when you've lost somebody you care deeply about. And truthfully, I think people often go doolally after somebody dies, because people start to behave in ways that truthfully you would say, I never would have expected that of them. People start to have a go at each other. Families can be so permanently divided after death if the will either hasn't been made or it is not clear. So one of the things, as I was looking at it, I want to help people to think about this as it's a conversation that you have ongoingly. You don't just have it, oh, I'm having it today, I'm going to make my will and I've done it. It's the conversation you have all the time because life changes. And it's so important because a lot of people make all sorts of assumptions about what will happen to what they have after they've died. So people say to me, well, of course, I've got to go to my children. Well, not necessarily. Or they say, just because I'm married, my partner can't, my husband, my wife can't just take my stuff. It's my stuff. Well, that's not how the law works. People say, well, anyway, I made a will before I got married. So even if he or she thinks they're going to grab my stuff, they can't. Actually, if you've made a will before you're married and then you marry, the will you made before is null and void. A lot of people don't know that. And it's not because they don't want their partner to have stuff. They're just having an assumption. And so that the children and the friends and the family, they have an assumption that, well, mummy, daddy, whoever, they've already said what they want doing. That's why it's a constant conversation. Someone said, I made a will 10 years ago and not much has changed. So why are you asking me to make another one now? And I say to people, well, partly to be sure when you say not much has changed, because you'll be surprised how much does change. And yet you don't think it's going to have any major impact afterwards, but it can. One of the things I often say to people is that after, when you've gone, people, I think lots of people do know what you wanted. When you were alive, people do know what you wanted. But after you've gone, you haven't got any voice anymore without a will. And so I say to people, a will is something at least every 5 years you should review it, or when there's been any significant change in your circumstance, you should review it. You've had a child, you've lost a child, you've married, you've divorced, you are now a blended family, you've got stepchildren, you've got children who, yeah, well, I was married, I've divorced, but you've still got a relationship with the children who may have been your stepchildren in that relationship. You can't just sit there thinking, well, everybody knows they should be fair, because what is considered fair, whilst that you're there to have a conversation, is different later on. I heard OC talk about pensions. So important, because people have pensions. If you're talking about your will while you're alive and you've got a pension, I would be saying to you, so have you made clear to the person or the organisation holding your pension what you want to happen with it afterwards? Do it with them, and then you put it in your will, because then you can check and ensure that what you want to happen happens. Now, the thing with wills are, that's why I say to people, talk to your friends and your family. Because when you make a will, you have to appoint what are called executors. Now, people assume that, well, I'll appoint my children, or I'll appoint my best friend, or I've got a really good niece who I'm really close to. And well, I say to them, the executors that you appoint, I always say appoint more than one. And don't appoint loads, because you set it up then for people to have arguments. But say you appoint 2 or 3, choose them carefully. You want people who you've had conversations with, who you've explained what you want to do and why, and who, whether they agree with you or not, have said, that's fine, I'll carry out your wishes. You also want people who can stay calm and focused during what will often become, no matter how well it is, quite tense and tension building experiences. And I think people say to me, well, okay, so I've chosen my executors. What if one of them dies before I die? And I say to them, that's why you're supposed to review your will, because that's a significant change. What if I fall out with one of them? That's why you review your will, because I don't want the person 20 years ago who's my best mate, who's now stabbed me in the back 3 times. No, you're not going to be my executor. And then people say to me, well, it's so expensive, Penny. Well, I say to them, yes and no. The question is, what is expensive? Well, you can go to a solicitor to write a will, and they would charge anything between £300 and maybe up to £800 or £900. I say to people, don't work just on the figure. Ask yourself, what are my assets? Are they quite complicated? Does it need, because depending, it may well be worth paying the solicitor £600 to do your will. But you don't have to. There are loads of will writing companies. All I would say to you is do your research. I've had dealings with 3. One was absolutely awful. But all I can say is you got what you paid for, because you paid 49 quid. Another one was excellent. I think in total it cost 149, but they had add-ons. So they had things like, we're going to do your will, we give you an annual free review, and for a small fee, we will store your will for you. Now, again, I say to people, you make your will, who are you going to tell where it is? Oh, well, I'll just leave it in my file at home. No, you need to tell your executors where it is, how they can access it. And then people say to me, well, okay, so I'm going to do my will. What if people still want to argue? What I say to them is people will argue. Unfortunately, that seems to happen with death. And I don't think it's because people are just horrible and mean. I think that's what death does to us. It makes us a bit bizarre in the way we think. But what I say to them is, if you've chosen your executors well, if your will is clear, when they start to argue, the response of the executors is, well, I hear what you're saying, but actually, Penny said she wanted this to go here, that to go there, and that is what we're going to do. Someone said, well, I'll take them to court. I said, feel free, but if you've got a few £1,000s to waste, because when you take them to court, if it is a bona fide will, you will lose. But also, I think, I say to people, and I love what Ossie was saying, think about, if you're going to make a will and you have to pay for it, say, you could help to benefit a cause that you felt dearly about. So I support a range of charities, but one of them is cancer research. Cancer research, along with lots of charities, what they offer is a free will writing service. They partner with solicitors. The solicitors will write your will for you. You don't pay the solicitor, but what happens is the charity invites you to think about leaving them something in your will. You don't have to, but they invite you to do that. I think most people who use those services do leave something. I didn't leave it in the will. I just said, well, you know what, I'll just pay you now. Thank you very much, and here's my contribution. But I think the thing with wills is, and I think Orin and Bev, you said it, we have to learn to be comfortable talking with our loved ones about what life is like for me now, what I hope life will hold for me, and when I've passed, this is what I'm telling you now. So I say to my children, my will be no surprise to you, because I keep telling you what I've put in it, and I keep telling you the provisos I've put around it. And I say to my two girls, if either one of you think you want to argue, look at what my will says. It says very clearly, one of you want to argue, get nothing, because that is not what this is about. I'm not living my life to work to leave you all something, but what I have afterwards, I'm blessed with it. I'm so happy that you'll be able to use it. So I want to say to you all, particularly people who marry and end up with blended families, think almost as soon as you get married, go and get a will, because the solicitor, and I say then go to an advisor, because there are all sorts of different ways you can make that will. But if you sit and talk about it, I would say neither family that have come together will be disadvantaged. Now, I feel very strongly about wills, but I also feel very strongly about enabling people to make plans. And just briefly, I want to pick up on lasting powers of attorney. Life is stressful. None of us knows what's going to happen. And at the moment, so many people are becoming ill with dementia. So what I'm saying to people is a lasting power of attorney allows you, when you are well, to say to those around you, I want you and you to support me. And there are two kinds of lasting powers of attorney. There's a financial one, health and welfare one. The financial one, and it's not an easy thing to do. So technically you can do it on your own, but I would say, unless you're going to give the time and attention, probably use a solicitor or a professional advocate, but get one, because if, God forbid, something should happen to us tomorrow and I'm not able to make my decisions about finance, I want someone there who's going to be able to look after that for me, to make sure that all the stuff I put in place for my wills is still secure. But also in terms of health and welfare, older life changes things. And with the health and welfare lasting power of attorney, one of the good things is you've told the people what you'd like to happen to you. I want to go into a home, I don't want to go into a home, I want to go into a particular religious home, whatever it is. And again, with lasting power of attorney, similar to wills, you appoint attorneys, people you trust, who you're saying, I trust you to make decisions in my best interest. Now, again, I've done quite a few of these, and people say, £500 for a lasting power of attorney, why do I need that? Well, £500 now to ensure that when you are not well enough to look after yourself, you can be provided for in the way you want, I think that's a very, very value for money, really good value for money. And I think, I can't remember who raised it, but when you need care, usually it's at a point in your life when you're not got your faculties anymore. So don't leave it until then. And I know one of my colleagues is going to talk about mental health and mental capacity. With lasting powers of attorney, why it's so important to do it when you're well and young. You cannot get one once you've lost mental capacity. So people come to me and say, oh, Penny, quick, mummy's getting really bad. She can't do this. And I need to get lasting power of attorney. And I said, can't. What do you mean? Yes, I can. I asked her and she said, yes, I want you to look after it. No, you can't. Because we have to be able to evidence your mum, your dad, whoever has capacity to make this decision. And we can't do that now. Well, what's going to happen? Well, what's going to happen is the state is going to jump in and they're going to make the decisions. So again, I'm now working very much with people saying, you're thinking of will, think of lasting power of attorney. And Ossie said, if you don't have a will and you die intestate, know that the government is going to do its utmost to take as much of whatever is left out of whatever there is. 40% in inheritance tax, they could end up with 80% of it. Because if you can't find a way to demonstrate, I wanted this to go here and that to go here, the government will say, oh, I'm sorry, there's nothing here that really does direct us there. So can I just leave you with, making a will, talking about will is about talking about living, making sure the life you live ongoingly is the best life you can live. And that when you've gone, you've left things in the best situation you can. And if your family who you leave behind are ignorant or stupid enough to think, oh, well, I don't care what mum said, I'm going to argue, honestly, they'll have a really tough time trying to get hold of what you want or what you had when they weren't even, their name didn't even appear in the first place. And you'd be surprised how many people leap out of the woodwork to say, me and she was best friend and she did say she was going to do this. Well, if she did say that, it would have been in my will. So if you don't see it in my will, I never said it. So it's a rush through, but it's really to say to you, please make a will. Please consider lasting power of attorneys.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Penny.
Constantine.
Oh my gosh.
It is vital information that you've imparted on all of us, for ourselves as individuals, as couples, as families, to tell so many others who are not on this call, but we can disseminate so much of this information. And the timing of this webinar is, you know, from the religious side, what Pastor Sweeney, from Ossie and yourself, the financials, it's vital, because as we know right now in real time, in this moment, we are looking ahead and as individuals and as a society, we're not sure what's coming to us. And it's causing us a lot of grief. You know, right now, what the mini budget that's just happened, the stress levels, some of us are going to succumb to something like this just from the stress of it alone, let alone health. And if we don't have things in order, that's when, as you say, everything falls apart because we didn't put our things in order. You know, my mom, 91, she's rubber stamped everything. You know, we've got everything. I know exactly what she wants, the power of attorney, everything being sorted, and she makes sure that that information is passed on to us, and it's for us to take care of that on her behalf, because she's put her things in order. And so, as I said, all of what you spoke about so far takes us directly into our next speaker to talk about the grief, the mental stress that comes with this subject matter, especially in this time right now, which I'll hand over to the expert, who is Janine.
Thanks,
Hey, Janine.
Hi, thanks, Bev. Hi, everybody. I'm just going to share my screen. I will try to keep to the 10 minutes.
Don't worry, you're good.
A moment.
I hope everyone's enjoying and this vital information that's been imparted to all of us. Show your appreciation if you can through the emojis. Feel free.
And we will get to your questions.
Definitely. All yours, Janine.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you to Oren and Bev for bringing us all together to talk about something that is so important and so difficult for many of us to even address. So let's get into it. So let's talk about passing away or passing on. Kicking the bucket. Going to a better place. Going to sleep or resting in peace. Losing someone, slipping away. Meeting our maker or being called home. Now, what all of these things have in common is that they are ways in which we as a society, as a community, choose to talk about death. And really what we need to talk about is exactly what it is. Death. The reason I think that we have found so many unusual ways, some of them like kicking the bucket, to talk about someone dying is it's a way of defending against the anxiety that naturally comes up when we think about death. And that anxiety is understandable because it really brings home to us the fact that we are not in control of absolutely everything, as much as we try to be as human beings. So how do I prepare myself? I think that when we think of preparation, there are two different things we need to think about. There are practical ways, which my fellow panelists have already spoken about, and others will after me, making sure that you have a will, that your family knows what your wishes are, planning for your funeral. But when we are talking about preparing for the loss of a loved one emotionally, that can be quite difficult. There are some things that we can do, but the one thing that has always consistently come up for me when I have my clients who are bereaved, whether or not that bereavement was through a sudden incident that has taken them away, or whether or not it was known it was coming because they had a life-limiting illness, the actual impact of the grief was the same. And we'll go on to talk about grief, but the emotional impact was actually the same. The knowledge, forewarning, there's no way to really prepare for how you're going to grieve. It's an individual experience. I've put down here preparation as an act of love, because I think if we kind of switch our mindset to think about preparing for our death or the death of a loved one as an act of love, it might be easier for us to actually speak about it. We do things out of love for the people we care about all of the time, whether or not that's making them dinner or doing something that they love to do. Preparing yourself by having a will, preparing yourself by being willing to talk to each other about what it is that you need and want, how you may be feeling if you are someone who has an illness or the person caring for somebody is really important, and giving yourself to down the line when death actually comes. Talking to our children about death is one of the most difficult things that we have to do as parents, carers, family members. And that's because we are set up and geared towards their protection. We think that if we speak about the loss, whether or not it's happened or it's on its way because someone is ill and is unable to be helped, we think that we're harming them in some way. We think that we're causing them pain and distress, and it's better that we don't bring it up and we just let them be children, that we're robbing them of something. But actually, research has shown that when children have autonomy, are involved, are informed about what's going on, are able to have spaces to talk about their fear, their worry, that actually they do better when the death actually happens. They do better in terms of their grief. It's less complicated. They cope better. They're more resilient. So really, when we are talking to our children, it's not harming them, it's helping them in the long run. And it's important that we actually realize that. If you are ever in a position where you have to deliver that news, I myself have had to deliver news of death to my own children, and it is very difficult. But when you are talking to them, it's really important that you are factual, that you are clear, and that you don't kind of overcomplicate it. So keep your messaging really simple. I'm really sorry. that auntie died last night. They don't need the details, they don't need to know the how, but just those clear messaging. And it's very important that we use the right words. So it's not that, you know, she's gone to sleep, because children will inevitably, you know, find a way to try and make sense of that. So, oh, if she's gone to sleep and I go to sleep, does that mean I won't wake up anymore? Mm-hmm. So it's really, really important that we are using the right terminology, and we are talking about death, dying, died, to try and make sure that they're grounded in the reality of that experience, and it doesn't become something that creates more anxiety, more worry down the line. So in talking about grief, I'm sure a lot of us are really fully aware of the stages of grief. There's so much about it. And a lot of people talk about Kubler-Ross and her stages. So, you know, anger, denial, acceptance. But when I'm working with my clients, I like to work with something called the grief wheel. And it was developed by the Grief Institute in Denver in 1986, but still stands today to try and, I guess, explain the cycle of grief. So hopefully you can see that quite clearly. What you see at the beginning is the loss occurs, and there are 4 phases. We first have shock, and this is where really there's the reality of that death has not sunk in yet. People will speak to me about feeling numb, like they just can't feel anything, that it's not real to them yet. We may see people have emotional outbursts at this time. We then move into the second phase, which is protest. So, you know, it's really just abject denial of the reality of the fact that the person I love has died. And that denial is met with the cold reality that they are no longer here. And the person you'll begin to see maybe a deterioration in their presentation. So a lot more kind of crying, irritability, increased shock. They will report being unable to stop thinking about the person who's died, how they died, replaying it over and over again. Anger. We then move into the third phase, which is disorganization. And that's where actually the reality is beginning to set in for the person who's lost somebody. That's where, you know, they're beginning to really understand the impact, the consequence of that person no longer being in their life, what that actually means for them. And we may see people really start to withdraw. So if you're trying to support a friend, you may find they're not answering your messages all of a sudden, or they're not picking up calls, they're not socializing, they're not talking. It may be that the person becomes quite apathetic, confused, depressed. We then have the final phase, which is reorganization. And that's really the rebuilding of life. That's where, you know, we are rebuilding life without this person, beginning to form new patterns of relating to others, new ways of behaving. But what is really important about this wheel is that it's not staged, it's not linear, because I think the stages kind of give you an idea that you're going to pass through each one, and that's my grief done. You know, I've got to acceptance now and it's all fine. The circle continues. It may be that today I feel like I'm doing pretty well. I'm able to think about the person that I love and not break down in tears and not be overwhelmed. I'm able to go out and socialize with my friends. But 2 days later, I'm right back in disorganization where I feel so sad that I don't even want to get up. You know, that's really all very normal. Everything on here is a normal part of the grieving process. And it's very normal to move back and forth throughout going through that before you finally settle into reorganization. Even when you settle, what's really important to know is that it's not that you've forgotten the person, and it's not that the pain ever goes away completely, but it's less intense. You are able to function, you are able to connect again. When we're grieving, grief will tell us a lot of lies. There's some of the lies that grief will tell you. You know what, I share this. If I share how I'm feeling, I'm bringing people down. I'm being a burden to them. So seek to withdraw. You know, a lot of work as a therapist is actually supporting my clients to understand that that's what's happening, that grief is making you feel this way, and to encourage them to continue to reach out for support and to let people in. I didn't do enough when they were alive. I didn't spend enough time with them. I let them down. Guilt is also a key emotion that comes for us when we've lost somebody that we love, we, in retrospect, are beating ourselves up for all the missed opportunities, the missed time. Nobody cares anyway. Everybody's moved on. That's a really common one that comes up. Grief will tell you, nobody cares about your loss, nobody cares that this person has died, only you. And you feel very alone and isolated in that. It's not actually true. Yes, in practical terms, life continues. Even life continues for you as much as you want it to stop. You know, work's to be done, you're still earning a living, you're still raising children, parent. And in most cases, you may be functioning still. Life does continue. It doesn't mean there's a lack of care, a feeling. And it's really about understanding, because that also seems to then make you feel grateful and makes you withdraw from the people that you need to be around so that you can be supported. I feel like I'm going crazy. Now, if we looked at that will, there were loads of different emotions that were depicted there. You know, we saw anger, we saw sadness, depression, loneliness, withdrawal, physical symptoms that also come with grief, which I didn't mention, such as, you know, feeling like I can't even catch my breath, I can't breathe, I can't eat anymore, I have no appetite, my sleep is disturbed. It's no wonder that my clients, when they come to me, and people that are going through bereavement, wonder if they're losing their mind. And really, you are not. It is part of the grieving process. It is all part of it. And it's quite normal, and it's important that people understand that. I'm weak or I'm broken. Clients will talk to me about feeling weak because they're not strong enough, because they want to break down in tears every 5 minutes. And I think a lot of that is to do with how we're socialized. You know, we are taught to be resilient. You know, we have to be strong. And even when people are in the most well-meaning way trying to comfort you after a loss, they talk to you about being strong for the person who's gone, being strong for maybe your children you need to look after. Grief is not weakness. It's a process we have to go through in order to continue on once we have lost somebody that we love. And we are most definitely not broken, even though it feels like it at times when we are going through this process. We are not broken. We may be bent under the weight of it, but we're not broken. In terms of support, when we think about supporting ourselves with grief, first and foremost, and if you only take one thing from this, it's to accept where I am at today in this moment. Whatever that emotion is when you are grieving, it is okay. If it's anger, it's okay. And when I'm talking about anger, it is also very normal to feel angry with the person who's gone, to feel angry that they've left you here and you're no longer together. That is also very normal, and a lot of people feel guilty about that, but that's part of the process. So it's about accepting your emotions, accepting where you're at, and giving yourself what you may need in that time. So if you feel that you need to cry, rather than trying to suppress it, let it out. Because suppressed emotion will always find its way out in another way, and probably in a way that was worse than what you were trying to avoid in the first place. It's important to try and physically take care of yourself as well when you're grieving, because as I've already spoken about, it can have impacts on appetite. So people stop eating, you know, which we all need to do. So it's about, even if it's little and often, just trying to eat something, taking some light exercise to get you up and moving when you can. And if you can't today, not beating yourself up about it. When you can, doing it, going for a little walk. I've put here the village because, you know, we all have one. I've had to lean on mine when I've had my losses, and I'm sure people listening have had to lean on theirs. And they are there ready to support us. And grief will kind of have us disconnecting from our village. Grief will have us believing that we're being too much for them at the moment. So it's better that I stay in my corner or in my room and cry at night, but not talk to someone. And when I have clients who speak to me about that feeling of being a burden, there's a question that I've asked all of them, and it is very simply, if it's 3 a.m. and it's the middle of the night and you've woke up distressed and you need to talk to someone, who's the person you're calling? And without fail, they have all been able to give me the name of at least one, sometimes more. And it's a great exercise in having people realize you are not alone, and it's okay to ask for help and to accept it. Therapeutic support also has its place when we're bereaved and when we are grieving. It may not be necessary for all, but for some, it's really beneficial. And I guess the key thing that I want you to take away when we're thinking about therapy is the quality of the relationship. It's a very different relationship that you would have with your therapist than you have with friends and loved ones. As a therapist, I'm not my client's mother, father, brother, sister, friend. There's none of the pre-existing relationship, expectation, experiences that can sometimes block us from seeking the sort of support that we may actually need in the moment. So, for example, there's no fear that if I break down in tears in front of you, that you're going to be overly worried about me or I'm going to upset you. It offers the clients an opportunity to therefore be really open about what they're experiencing, and for me then to be able to kind of assist them to get their way, to find their way through it, and to give them the tools they need to kind of support themselves when they're not in the room with me. In terms of other bereavement support, there are so many agencies working in the field of bereavement. You know, you could literally put in grief and bereavement in Google and many of them would come up, but just to name a few, there are some that specialize in working with children, such as Child Bereavement UK and Winston's Wish. There are others that work across the board, such as Cruise, Mind. So I'll be sharing a document with Orin and Bev that they'll send out to everybody that kind of lists various agencies that you can seek support from. But, you know, the most important thing that I guess I would like you to take away is that grieving is a natural process. It's a part of life, just as death is. And grief is not a sign of weakness. It's not you going mad. It's a bit of a roller coaster, which is why I like the wheel, because it kind of depicts that roller coaster that we go on when we're grieving. But we do make it through to the other side. We may be a little bruised, a little battered, but we do, and we are able to continue living. I'd like to leave us with this quote, which reads that grief never actually ends, but it does change. It's a passage and not a place to stay. Grief is not a sign of weakness nor a lack of faith, but it's the price of love. Thank you.
Perfect ending.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Janine.
Calming, soothing words that I think can definitely has hit home personally with us. I'm sure with many people on this webinar.
I'm not even going to say anything, because a lot of what you just showed on the wheel are my experiences. The only area that I didn't relate with was being disorganized, because I went into overdrive.
Yeah, and that can happen too.
Yeah,
that also
yeah.
is a response. You know, we focus so much on the doing that it's a defense against what's happening emotionally. But yeah,
I want to read something to you. We're running slightly over, guys, but we will get through everything. Please stay with us. But I need to read something to Janine, an email that was sent to us by an anonymous person. I don't know if they're male, female. I suspect they're female. But Janine, if you could give us an answer on this, then after that, we will move on to our next speaker. So it says, my nephew passed away in 2021 from a sickle cell related problem. He was only 30 years young. His grandmother has turned into a recluse. Other family members have surrounded themselves with people who won't allow his name to be mentioned, or when they start to cry, they are told by those people not to cry. My niece has a very small child aged 11 years old, and she is going through the 1 year old, and she is going through the motions. I fear she is blindly existing, and as a result is missing her 1 year old grow up. Also, my children and nephews and niece from other siblings are also understandably broken. We don't get together anymore. We don't seem to be able to talk like we used to. How do I get my nephew's mother and my niece to start to grieve? How do I fix my family? I feel emotional reading this. This is so sad. I've tried to get everyone together, but there's always some excuse from someone or some people. Any advice would be appreciated. Thank you for reading this, and God bless you.
First, yeah, just like you, Bev, feeling quite emotional hearing that. To hear, you can just feel the distress.
Yeah.
The person who's written that.
Yeah.
So first and foremost, thank you for sharing your experience, and I'm so sorry for the loss of your nephew. You asked the question, how can I get them to grieve? They already are, is the answer. They are. They are, it seems, withdrawing rather than reaching out in the way that we just spoke about. But you cannot get them to move any quicker than they are at the moment. You know, he died last year. And really, in terms of grieving, we're quite early on for you and your family. It's not at a point where we would think that maybe it's become quite complicated or they're stuck yet in terms of time. But you cannot control their journey through this. All you can do is what it sounds like you've already been doing, which is trying to be there for them, trying to let them know that you are still there, and repeatedly offering a space for connection. In regards to your own children, as much as it may be that they can't talk to the wider family, they can talk to you. In regards to your niece and nephew, they can talk to you, and it's about you being that person for them. And if you are present and they feel that they need to cry, then you be the voice that says it's okay, and you model that for them. Because, you know, if you're feeling sad, all of us, if any of us are grieving, hiding it from children isn't helpful. It's really important that they're able to see that it's okay to be sad. It's okay to feel whatever it is, whether or not it's angry, you know, feeling particularly sad on a day, tearful. It's okay for them to see that you are feeling that too, and for you to name that for them. So, you know, you as their uncle or their aunt, you can be that person for them, even if there are others that can't do that at the moment for whatever reason.
Thank you.
I would really like to talk to you outside of here, if that's what you'd like, because it did kind of raise questions for me that obviously we can't answer here. If you would like that, then Bev can give you my details, and you can reach out to me and we can do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
I'll send an email to them and hope that they will come back to us. Thank you very much, Janine.
Thank you so much.
We're going to move swiftly on
to Candice.
Candice
Hines, special nurse for organ donation, who works with and for NHS blood and transplant.
And just before Candice starts, and just past Candice, we will have Damien Melville from Melville and Daughters Funeral Director, and then we'll open up for some questions. Yeah, thank you, Candice.
Hi, so I'm Candice. I'm the specialist nurse for organ donation, and I am based in Oxford. Thank you, ACL team, for inviting me here this evening on the panel. All the speakers are inspiring, and I can't wait for the questions at the end. I'd just like to echo what everyone has said, which are three sentences which I have written down, which is put your house in order, talk to your friends and family, and a clear messaging. And that's my message today. But we'll just go on to what is organ donation first, and go through some taboo, some statistics within our BAME community. So organ donation is when you decide to give an organ to save or transform the life of someone else. And I think that's quite important. So you're trying to save or transform the life of somebody else by giving an organ. So you can donate organs in life, or you can donate organs after death. And in life means you're an altruistic donor, which you can donate a kidney to someone once you're matched, or if you're young and fit and you don't have any past medical history, you can donate a lobe of your liver while you're alive. or most of the other organs and tissues are donated after you have died, okay? And some of those organs are the heart, the lungs, the liver, the pancreas, intestines, kidneys, as I said, and tissues. You can donate your corneas, you can donate your skin, heart valves, and bone. Okay. So within the Black and Asian community, patients who are on the waiting list represent a third of those within the Black and Asian community. So a third of those people are on the waiting list, okay? Which is quite a high number of people. And I think Osi was saying that because of our ethnicity, we are more prone to high blood pressure and diabetes, which is a result of us suffering from organ failure, okay? Yes, also, yes, that's the stats there. Thanks, Oren. So if you look at that, 1% of people who die each year, that's within the population suitable for organ donation. 11.5 of all eligible deceased donors are from the BAME communities, and the family consent rates for organ donation are 36% from the BAME community, and whereas from our white counterparts are 75%. So you can see the difference there. But before we go on to the stats, I'll just go through more of what I have to say. So in 2019-20, that was the highest transplants that took place on the BAME community, which was 1,187. And there was something put in place in 2019 in September where the matching run for organs, they had put the BAME community as higher up on the waiting list. It was just because lots of us were dying, waiting for an organ, and our white counterparts were getting the organs faster and they were living, okay? So there was something put in place in order for us to get organs faster as well, okay? Our community are dying waiting for an organ because we don't want to talk about death in life. There's taboos that if we possibly talk about death, that we might die tomorrow. We don't want to talk about our wishes or decisions to our family while we're alive. And when we die, our families don't know what we want. And most of the Black community and the Asian community, the reason for declining for organ donation is mostly, I didn't know what my loved one wanted. So I'm just echoing what everyone has said tonight is talk to your family about your decisions in life. It's just about the wills. Talk to your family about what you want after you have passed, okay? So although the BME organ transplants are the highest ever, there were fewer overall organ transplants in the last financial year, 2021, because of the pandemic. And there were lots of Black people who died in this pandemic. And as a result of that, the waiting list has gone down, okay? So there's an imbalance between the BAME community of the people donating and those that are waiting on the transplant list, okay? So there's lots of people who are waiting from our community. However, there's not lots of people who are willing to donate, okay? And if you ask some of us why, it's because I believe that when I'm in hospital, the doctors wouldn't give me a chance. If I sign up to the organ donor register, they'll just quickly take my organs. And that's not how it works. I think we all need educating and you have to die in a certain way to become an organ donor. And as we say here, only 1% of the population dies in that way to become an organ donor. And you have to be on a ventilator in the intensive care, because there's a lot of arrangements and a lot of setups before organ donation can take place. So it's not as you enter the hospital, they'll say, oh, you've signed the register, so we'll take your organs. It really doesn't work like that, okay? And I am Black, that's my job, and I can see it from the inside. It does not work like that, okay? So in February of 2020, there was 1,909 people from the BAME community actively waiting for a life-saving transplant, and this is 2020. And in the data for 2020-2021, which is the last financial year, it is a 34% fall from the BAME community waiting, and that was due to the COVID pandemic. So there's only at the moment 1,237 people waiting for a transplant. Okay, and you can see that there on which is highlighted on the black line. So if you look at that black line going across the screen, if you go up a little bit, Orin, you'll just see the year. Sorry, go down, sorry. We just want to see the year at the end of that chart. So 2016, 2017, the transplant list was 1,863, and we can see the decline now, 1,237. So it has had a big drop because of the pandemic, okay? So the Max and Kira's law came in May 2020, and if we hear through the media, it's all about presumed consent and deemed consent, and the government. Some people will say the government has a hold of your body, and when you die, the government tells you what to do with your body, which is also not true. We still go to the family. So although it's presumed, if you don't sign the register, if you're not on the register, it's presumed that you have consented to be an organ donor. You can still go in there and actively opt out. However, it's a soft opt out. So we wouldn't just take your organs, we still go to your family. And that's why it's important to let your family know about your decision, about your wishes, okay? So if your family were to say no, although it's presumed consent, if your family says no, we will take that as a no. Obviously, we will go around and ask why no, what was the last decision, you know. However, we wouldn't just say, we'll take your organs. We still go back to the family. So please, guys, let your family know about your decisions in life. And it's just a little bit about the Max and the Kira's law. So Max was this little 9-year-old boy who was waiting on a heart transplant. And he had a viral illness which caused his heart to fail. Sadly, this 9-year-old girl was involved in an accident, and she was dying with no coming back, okay? And her family, they were brave enough to say, my daughter is dying and we would like to offer all her organs. Max was on this waiting list for 196 days. His family thought that he had no chance and he was going to die. And then Kira came about, okay? He got this transplant and he's still living today. And even saying this raised my pulse right now, okay? So he campaigned for this presumed consent, okay? It came into 2017 when Theresa May was in power, and she said it's going to be called the Max's Law. He said, I want my donor to be part of this. So let's call it the Max and Kira's Law. And that is how the law came about, the Max and Kira's Law. And it's all about the presumed consent, okay? As Max has said, even if it saves just one life, it will be worth it. I know what it is like to wait for an organ, so I hope the change in law will mean some people wouldn't have to wait as long in the future. And I think that's quite poignant, okay? Especially for us as a Black community. And as I said before, the most common refusal among the ethnic communities is, we don't know what our loved ones would have wanted. So please, guys, talk to your family. While we are alive and while we are well, just let your family know about your decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you
so
very much,
And
Candice. Thank you.
this
Oren's
is-
going to show you
this
his
is what it's
organ
about.
donor card. I've got one as well, by the way, because you can do it online.
Yeah, and you're so right, Candice. The gift you can, it's the ultimate gift you can give to someone, to give life and after death. And we just implore people to please stay within the organ donor register. Please don't opt out. I know it's a personal choice, but please, if what you've heard just now should give you substance to be able to think seriously long and hard about the need to stay on the register and to speak to your family.
Make sure you speak to your family.
Yeah.
Let them know of your wishes.
Yeah.
Can I just say one other thing? Although Black and Asian communities can receive an organ from our white counterparts, the match among ourselves is the best match.
Exactly.
So that's so important that we can donate, because I'm sure we are willing to receive an organ as well.
Exactly.
Perfectly said.
Perfectly rounding it up. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank you,
Candice.
Candice.
And last but not least, the person that we all go to at the end is, someone like Mr. Damien Melville, funeral director, who looks after us and our loved ones in that most
At the final
at
stage.
the final stage. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Oren and Beverly. Thank you for having me today. Like you said, that I'm the one person that people do not want to really face. And I'm just echoing everything that all of the fellow panelists have said today. It's so important to have this conversation because it makes the experience of seeing someone that you don't want to see so much easier. Because organizing a funeral is probably the hardest, if not the hardest thing that any of us will have to do. And in many instances, it's going to be on multiple occasions. So having your finances in order, your will in order, makes all of the decisions that you have to make when you come to see someone like me so much easier. And we've seen both sides of the scale, whereby we have one family where they've had that conversation, they know what their loved one wants. So it's very, it's a very stressful experience coping with a death anyway and arranging a funeral. But when you've got it all written down, you know what that person wants, it's so much less stressful, as opposed to the flip side of the coin, where we didn't know what mum wanted. We don't know what flowers she would like. We don't know if she wanted a church service, or if she wanted to be buried or cremated, or if she wanted to be repatriated. Now, there are so many, because it's a one-time event, it is extremely stressful for a person to make those decisions, not knowing that they're making the right decision. So that is why it's so important to have this conversation. Have it and then forget about it, essentially, really, because once you've had that conversation, everyone knows where you stand, and then it makes your experience a lot easier when you come to see someone like me. Yeah, it's so painful to see people grieving and in this world of indecision, because that simple conversation wasn't had. You don't have to go into all of the details about exactly what you want, but just a simple question of whether you're going to be buried, cremated, or repatriated, that is halfway there. And it's a very important thing to people. So it's I don't want to go on and on and on about the funeral as such. I think it's possibly more important for me to answer specific or more targeted questions rather than me droning on about being a funeral director. I think it might be a little bit more beneficial.
Yeah.
No worries, and it's perfect because I can see there's quite a few questions in there which are probably aimed at yourself, Damien. So I'm going to hand over to Sabrina to pick out some of the relevant questions for our panelists.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, Sabrina is works for ACLT. She's our National Development Manager, but she very kindly agreed to be our Q&A person so that she can raise the questions to each of the panelists and we'll get all your answers. So Sabrina, can we bring you in, my love?
Of course. Bear with me. So I'm just going through the many questions we have. But there was one in particular, Damien, that I wanted to highlight about eulogies. So is that something that's discussed beforehand? If, say, for example, you live in a different country and you may not be buried in that country?
Not, I wouldn't say so. No, not really, because it's a eulogy is a short story about the person's life. So where they're going to be laid to rest isn't really of consequence in relation to the eulogy, because it can be written whether they're going to be buried here or abroad. It's just it's fact finding about that person, really.
Okay, thank you for answering. And what would you say are the plans in which you can put in place for repatriation? What's the best way about going and preparing for that, if that's someone's wishes?
Okay, so first of all, tell the family that that is what you want to happen. On the other side in the country that you're going to be repatriated to, make preparations in terms of the burial ground where you're going to be buried, because in a lot of places that has to be secured before they allow the person to come back. So for instance, in Portugal, for instance, when you repatriate someone to Portugal, the cemetery in Portugal has to send a letter of permission to the consulate in the UK before they will allow the person to be repatriated.
And can you tell us the financial implications of repatriation?
Essentially, it's like having two funerals. So you have the cost of the transportation from this country over to, say, for instance, Jamaica, but then you have to be prepared for the funeral as such, the service and the burial. That cost is going to have to be borne as well. So the transportation on average to Jamaica is around about 3,500 to 3,700. And then you've got the burial costs, which will be applicable in Jamaica.
Goodness, that seems quite expensive.
You say that, sorry to interject, you say that, but for instance, in Tottenham, where my business is based, the cost of graves alone, just the graves, is £10,000.
Whoa.
Yeah, £10,000. So that's without any of the services that we provide as a business. So in that particular cemetery, by the time you've chosen a coffin, flowers, cars, that type of thing, you're looking at £15,000. So if you compare that to repatriating to Jamaica, it might end up actually being cheaper.
I think I'm going to Jamaica.
Take me with you.
Okay. Any more questions?
Whilst we're on this subject of there's loads of questions, I'm telling you, there's tons, but whilst we're on this subject of repatriation, I just wanted to ask, how do you organize who receives the body once this arrives? Is it a family member? Is it then another funeral director? Who is it that receives it?
Depends on the country.
Okay.
So in the majority of the Caribbean, it has to be a funeral director that collects the deceased from the airport, because there's lots of different formalities that they have to carry out. In parts of Africa, It can be either a funeral director or it can be a family member, but they have to obviously carry out all of the formalities at the airport of entry.
Okay.
Sabrina, could we just get, if there's any questions for Janine, because Janine has to leave shortly.
There isn't any at the moment, but if you do have questions, please put them in the Q&A section. Or if it's something you want to think about, take away and email us.
Yeah.
We can always pass your questions on to Janine or the other panelists after the event.
Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt. Because I was scanning through as well, and someone had kind of responded to the email that you wrote about the loss of his brother.
Oh.
That he feels it's only him and his mum that speak about them, and it just really brought to mind and something else that I really would love for everyone to think about. You know, in trying to support someone who's you know had a loved one die and is going through their grieving process, it can feel really difficult. And we already discussed how difficult it is to talk about death in the first place. But when you're watching a friend or family member struggle, you can feel at a loss of what to do. And sometimes that can then equate to them feeling like they can't share or they can't talk about that person with you. And you are afraid to maybe bring them up because you're going to upset them. And I guess what I would really encourage everyone to do is, even if you don't know quite what to say, then say that. Say, I'm here. Simply just be like, I'm here. And if you need to talk about him or her at any time, I'm here. And it's okay to say their name.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. Just before you get going again, Sabrina, I've just a quick one for Candice. Someone's asked a question: if you have sickle cell trait, can you give blood and can you be an organ donor? The answer, as far as I know, is yes. Can you just reconfirm that?
Yes, you can, because there could be somebody else on the waiting list who is sickle cell as well. So you can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Back to you, Sabrina.
Yeah, I just wanted to go over to, if we can, Penny, about will writing. Do you have any recommendations for the best will writing companies?
I wouldn't give a recommendation per se. What I would say to people is it's worth doing your research. There are loads out there, and you know, sometimes what's good for one person is not for somebody else, because a lot depends on how you feel when you're talking to them, and also what's the package they're offering. So like I say, some offer just the will writing, others offer you the will writing, the storage, the reviewing, and a lot. Even the will writing companies, if you've got a fairly complex, potentially estate, they will involve a solicitor. So will writers per se are not solicitors. They take another sort of qualification. So I wouldn't recommend one, but I would say there's some very good ones out there. And if anybody wants to email, I'll tell them the couple that I've found good, because I'm not the only one who's interacted with them.
Yeah, so if anybody's interested, just email us at ACLT, that's info@aclt.org, and we will get the answers, that the suggestions that Penny's just suggested. Keep going, Sabrina.
Yeah, I just wanted to say someone's added that this forum is giving a wealth of information. How do we get a copy of this session? So it is being recorded and will be streamed. It's streamed on YouTube, and we'll be able to watch. You'll be able to watch it at a later date. We had a question again for Penny, more of an understanding actually. Someone mentioned that having the lasting power of attorney was invaluable before she was diagnosed with dementia. We've got one about, oh, where's it gone? There's so many. I'm trying to get through them all.
Yeah.
We got one, Penny, I wanted to know your thoughts on this. So it says, our parent does not want to send her financial details to her mental health team, who have said that she must be assessed first for capacity. This is her main reason for not going ahead with making her will. She says she doesn't want these people in her business.
That is something I hear quite a lot, and often in our community. what I usually advise with that is for the family and the person to bring in someone like another advocate to talk with the person about what will happen if you don't have that conversation. I think the thing about having people in your business is they don't need to know your finances. They don't need to go through your back. They don't need to, all they're doing is making an assessment about whether or not you are capable of making the decision about having a will, having a lasting power of attorney. I do some of those assessments, and really it is about me satisfying myself that nobody's bullying this person, no one's coercing them. The person, without me being really complicated, understands what a lasting power of attorney will do, what a will do. And often I will show them some examples, because if they've got capacity, they will get it. If they haven't got capacity, sadly, I will know, because they'll be talking, I'll be thinking, you don't understand what it is I'm putting to you, therefore I would not say you have capacity. But I think it's about, you don't have to tell them all your ins and outs. That is not what an assessment's about. And the other reason why I say try and get them to do that is someone put in the chat about, you know, can they come and take my parents' house if they lose capacity and I want to go and they need to go into care. If you do it right, they can't come and take your parents' house whilst they're alive. When they pass, that's a different thing altogether. So again, I would say to people, go talk to a financial advisor, not when you think mum and dad's going to be sick in 3 years. Go talk to them when mum and dad is only 65. What should I do with my estate? Ossie's there. I keep saying to people, if you think that, hand your house to one of your kids, do this, do that, make those plans. And if your family are really with you, someone said, well, if I give my child a house now, and what if she wanted to throw me out after certain, well, if you have that in your mind, don't give it to them. But if you believe what you're going to put in your will, etc., it's a good thing to have joint ownership of some of your assets, because it does help to protect it.
Thank you.
Sabrina, just before you get onto, actually, can I ask Sabrina, whilst I answer this next question, can you look for any questions for OC and Pastor Ian Sweeney? There's a question about organ donation and blood donation in terms of upper age limit. You have to be 65 as a blood donor to be giving blood. Once you get to 65, and if you haven't, then you can't start. You have to.
It's 66.
Okay.
66.
66.
Yeah.
You need to be giving blood by then, and you just go on to infinity as a blood donor. And as an organ donor, there isn't an upper limit on organ donation. Any age from the age of 16 above.
No, actually, to be an organ donor, there's an upper age limit of 85.
Oh, 85. Okay. Oh, we've just learned something. Flipping heck.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you for that clarification.
85, did you say?
Yes.
85.
Okay. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And for blood donation, as Orin said, you can start donating blood from the age of 17. And as long as you're donating, you can donate until you pass away. Or if you've never donated before, you can donate up until the age of 66, and then you can donate beyond. Yeah. Okay.
Sabrina?
Yes. So, OC, can you tell us a little bit more about trusts? So you mentioned about putting some of your assets in trusts. I mean, Penny can probably answer this one as well.
Well, I think to start off with is that there are different types of trusts. So it's important to, first of all, get advice. But the simplest way to look at a trust is that you are entrusting assets to be managed by someone else, normally a trustee. So a good example are pensions. So pensions organically aren't actually part of your estate. They're set up in trust, and there's a trustee behind it. But you must update a document called a letter of wishes or expression of wishes, which explains who benefits from your pension, which is in trust when you die. So it's a very simple process, very simple form to complete. It's a powerful thing to do because pensions are one of the only other assets which are exempt from 40% inheritance tax. So if it's kept well, and you haven't made plans on how it's disbursed, then you've defeated the object of how the assets have grown over time. But speaking generally, there are other trusts that you set up for the benefit of caring for children in the future, for those with lots and lots of money that are really worried about the financial education and expertise and decisions people may make. People set a trust to make sure that you don't have hostile beneficiaries, because one of the challenges you have in life is what life skills do you leave your children for them to make the legacy last generation. There are so many stories of wealth that's been generated within our community, and in one lifetime, it disappears. So in those communities, it's important that a trust is set up for them.
Thank you. Sabrina?
Yeah, we've got another one. So you mentioned briefly about your pension not being a part of your estate and actually in the trust itself. Can you tell us the pros and cons for setting up a pension for children and speaking about that before you pass?
Yeah, so I think you go back to basics. So a pension, from my perspective, there are two important parts of it. So generally, it's a scheme where the government want people to have financial freedom. And because they want people to have financial freedom, they will add into your pension. So you get something called tax relief. In layman's terms, every pound you earn, if we could forget the mini budget for now, but before the mini budget, the lowest tax rate was 20%. So for you to have £1 in your pension, all you had to do was put in 80p and the government put in 20. So on the way in, you're getting tax relief. Crucially, what's more important is whilst your pension assets are working, and I'm referring here to pension that isn't state pension, this is mostly private company pension, because with a state pension, what you're relying on are the younger generation to carry on working and pay national insurance, because the state pension is funded from national insurance. But whilst your pensions are growing in your company pension or private pensions, it's tax exempt. And it's a powerful multiplier effect, because if you can imagine having an investment return for 20 odd years and not having the admin of paying tax over 20 years, that pot of money can grow exponentially. Now, when it comes to children, which I believe what the question is about children's pensions. So there are two things I think there. So first of all, you've got to be quite careful. So when you're gifting within your estate, there is an amount of money where when you gift above that, you have to survive 7 years before it's tax exempt. So at the moment, it's £3,000, £3,000. So typically what people will do is gift, say, 2,800. That's the gift from your estate. Kwasi Kwarteng, if he remains Chancellor, will pay in another 20%. And for me, that's a strong benefit, because you can start that from a very young age for your children. There are drawbacks with the pension, because although it goes tax-free, you get the relief on the way in. Think about it in the fact that the child will not be able to access it until a point in the future. So the earliest you can access your pension is typically 55. You can draw a quarter of the pension pot. So the use of a pension, in my view, would be to reduce the size of your taxable estate, going back to what Penny mentioned about them even coming for 80% than the 40. But crucially, what you're trying to do is motivate the child with life skills to understand you must save for a rainy day. You cannot rely on the state, and it's incumbent upon you to make better life choices. One of the fundamental issues we have in the BAME community is that wealth isn't progressive. It doesn't seem to really pass 3 generations. We'll wait and see what happens with Jay-Z and Beyonce and Ivy, but typically BAME dentists, maybe not Asians, but Black businessmen and women, it's quite rare to see generational wealth passed through 3 stages. And that's largely because we don't do enough of this, which is educating ourselves, talking to ourselves, and feeding ourselves. The pastor will tell you about the scripture in the Bible that talks about my people are destroyed because of lack of knowledge. There is no evil eye anywhere. There is no voodoo with your family name marked on it. What we don't do is simply pass the right information to the next generation to be successful. So it's a tick in the box for a child's pension, but you must be mindful that the exit points are, you know, if you're planning for your child, it's at least, and the child's 5, it's at least 5 decades away.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Sabrina?
I'm just going to take it to Pastor Sweeney. Fantastic talk at the beginning. We had some questions that didn't go into the Q&A, but came across to myself via email. People want to know, where is your church and what time is the service?
Yeah, I'm all over. I'm not based at a local church, but there's loads of Seventh-day Adventist churches all over the place.
Yeah,
I'm
but
sure.
you're not all of them, where they want to know where you are.
Well, last week I was in Iceland.
That helps.
Do you
So
stream
I don't
live?
have a church.
Yeah,
do you stream live?
Yeah. A lot of the churches stream live. I'm all over the show now. I was introduced. I was based in. I had a churches up in Sheffield and stuff, but now I've sort of across Europe. So I'm in Poland this weekend. So sorry, but there's a lot of decent Christian preachers out there that will, you know, give you sensible advice. I believe. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Sab?
There are at the moment another 80 questions in the Q&A.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if we have
tough.
time.
No. What should we just make a decision to? Orin's going to copy and paste all of the questions, and how do we actually answer these so that everybody gets their answers?
Well, we can try and forward these questions onto the relevant panelists to get a response.
Yeah.
I mean, there are so many.
And then how do we send it back to the relevant person? That's
oh, that's a good question. What we could do is post it. I'm just trying to think. We can publicly put it onto our website. Just the collage of the questions. Sorry.
Why don't we just create a Jen, if you're listening, we can create a forum to get conversations going that can be monitored with Q&A.
What's that, on the website?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a question I can see right here, which probably is for Constantina.
Jen is saying that we can post it on our YouTube. I don't know what that means, but
okay.
We sure can.
There's so many questions coming in that the one I was going to ask is now just being superseded by here we are. My nan left. I think you may have asked this, but my nan left no will. My aunt lived in the house, has died. Who owns the house now? Does it go to probate?
The thing is, if she's left a will, then and she's got executors, the executors have it goes to probate, because you have to go to probate for probate then to say, yes, we accept that this will is bona fide, and now you, the executors, can distribute the assets. Yeah, and then you follow what the will says.
Yeah, Penny, it says that my nan left no will.
No will.
No will.
Well, then you have a problem, because she's died intestate. It has to go through probate, and what happens then is, what my experience is, that I say to people, she may not have left a will in the sense that I'm talking about it, but can you produce any evidence that shows what you believe her intentions were? And if you can come up with, well, look, here are the last 4 letters that she sent to me, and when she said, I want this and this and this and this. The government wants their money, but at the same time, they don't want to put themselves in a position where someone can then take legal action against them. So if you can produce that, then there can be a conversation. But remember with that, what if one daughter has 2 letters where mum said that, one nephew has a letter where she said, give 50% to my church, another, all of that will have to be taken in the pot, and probate with those reasonable people, as I hope they are, will have a conversation about it. But the truth is, without a will and without some evidence, they can't take your house, but they can take a big percentage of the value of what your asset is.
Okay, thank you very much. Just a quick question for Damien. What happens to the deceased if there are burial disputes or you cannot afford a funeral?
Okay. What would the burial disputes be? Because it very much depends.
They've not gone into any detail.
Yeah, see, that's a very, that question needs to be separated out of the one to do with if they don't have any money. If they don't have any money, because it's two separate questions really. If they don't have any money, then they can apply to the Department of Work and Pensions, who may make a contribution towards the funeral cost, but more often than not, they don't pay for all of it. They will make a contribution. Where the person really doesn't have anything, then the local authority are duty bound under the Health Protection Act to lay that person to rest, whether it's a burial or cremation, depending on their wishes, if they are able to find them. They try not to do cremations because it's finite. They will try to do a burial if there's burial space available, so that if at a later date anyone does come to light, they can, it's reversible, so to speak.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we're gonna
wrap it up
wrap it up
very soon.
Yeah.
Any final questions that you think we can put to our panelists, Sabrina?
So there was something on there about, because so many of us are migrant generation, about what if my family has property back home and all the rest of it. The will you make over here is the will for over here. And if you have not made another international will, you could have problems. However, if you can demonstrate that, say I as a daughter has been managing my mother's affairs in the Caribbean, I've been on her bank accounts, I've done that, so and so, so and so. What I can do is to get my grant of probate, which I would have had from the will over here, I can get that notarized, and it's quite a process, get it notarized, then I've got to go or send it to the Caribbean for a Caribbean lawyer to also do their bit over there and put it before the courts over there before I can do anything with the stuff that's left back behind. So I say to people, if you know your parents have substantial assets, make a will for the Caribbean, Africa, India, wherever it is, so that it because the laws are so different, and the two bits of law, international, they don't really mesh, and there can be a lot of argument.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It's appropriate actually to finish on that point. Actually, it's you know, get everything in order nationally, internationally. In closing, I just really want to say thank you to our panelists, Pastor Sweeney, Ozzy Canova, Constantia Penny, Janine Robertson, Candice Hines, and Damien Melville. Thank you so much for bringing so much value to this subject matter. It's been very, very constructive. I can say that personally, and I can see from the comments and the questions that have been thrown at us. It shows it's a subject matter people really want to talk about. And we may have to do a part 2.
I was just going to say that.
Down the road, because this is very topical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. I was just going to add a part 2 is definitely imminent, because we have a question that was posed and I was going to dismiss it, but I think it just highlights the reason why we're having this conversation. And the question was, what if you don't believe you'll ever die?
Oh, okay.
We might need a weekender for that one.
Yeah.
I've got to say, when the Queen passed away, apparently a lot of people said, my God, I thought she was going to be here forever. Yeah. But I think she proved the point that actually we are all going to die.
Yeah, we're all mortal. Yeah. So we'll leave that one for part 2. That will be a challenge you wanted as a gateway to the next, you know, Black people. Let's talk about death part 2. We did it on COVID. We can do it on this one. So let's put it together. Thank you, panelists. Thank you, attendees.
Yeah,
I
thank
know
you.
we've gone over time. We thought we might do, but thank you for hanging in there. Most of you are still there. Thank you for your really searching, bold questions on this. One thing the ACLT is doing right now, our buzzword is to be provocative. And this is what we are doing. We are challenging ourselves and our community and the wider community on subject matters that need to be discussed and debated. Thank you to the ACLT team, Ronke, Callum, Jendai, Zara, Sabrina, my better half, and all the other
And my better half.
and everyone else associated with the charity. Really do appreciate it. Donors and everyone else, thank you. We are going to push this on, and really just want to say thank you to everyone. Enjoy the rest of the evening.
If you've got any questions, just get in touch with us, info@aclt.org. Thank you.
Appreciate it. All the best.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Bless you. Take care.